year went to Caleb Williams. Sports Illustrated's SI Sportsbook put out a list, Craig and Paul, of their favorites based on the odds, and not a surprise yet at all, overwhelmingly, that Caleb Williams is the favorite. And then, after that, North Carolina quarterback Drake Maye, Michael Penix of Washington, Jaden Daniels, who I don't really see his name out there a lot, but obviously with LSU and then Florida State, there's like 3 or 4 different lists here, but let's discuss these. Jordan Travis of your beloved Florida State Seminoles.
I actually, and this is not an indictment on Caleb Williams, this is just history. Only one person's ever done it, and then the last 2 guys that have come back, 3 guys that have come back, all didn't win it. Tebow didn't win it. Johnny Manziel didn't win it again, and Jameis Winston didn't win it again. So it's really hard to do. It's one of those things that, Caleb Williams, as fantastic as he is, it's going to kind of have a target on him from everybody else, and he's going to get everybody's best shot. In the case of Johnny Manziel, I mean, you just watch the documentary, you kind of know why that went down. So every case is different, but I don't think that's going to be the case for Caleb Williams necessarily. But yeah, I know he's got the odds-on favorite, but I would almost lean personally that saying any of these other guys are going to win it just because it's only happened once and it hasn't happened in 50 years.
Is it like taking the field, Craig, in a golf tournament like Tiger when he was that good? You take Tiger and everybody else gets everybody else. I would like to know what the odds would be if you took the field against Caleb Williams. But your thoughts about this, at least this first page?
I mean, lots of quarterbacks. That's the first thing that jumps out to me is not really any other representation for a Blake Corum or, anybody else you'd want to lump into that mix. If you want to go the receiver route, Marvin Harrison Jr., if you want to, pinpoint just another area, that's just very quarterback heavy. But, I mean, that's what a lot of awards are, and that's what the Heisman can be. So, that's not a knock. It's just what jumps out is it's all 5 quarterbacks. As far as the Caleb Williams things go, I mean, I understand Paul's point, and I think if you were betting, yeah, you would take Vegas, but I wouldn't falter at all or feel in any way shaky in my confidence if I got to take the ticket that has Caleb Williams' name on it. I mean, I understand only Archie Griffin's done it. I understand many guys, as you mentioned, have come back and not won it. But, for whatever reasons, I mean, I think that he'll be right there in the mix once again, barring injury. He's just a great player in general. Forget what anybody else has done before or what history has said. I know that the odds do not favor him winning it a second time because, again, it's only happened once in this, era. So I get it, but man, if you were going to bank on somebody doing it, he'd be a damn good player to bank on doing it. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a fascinating story all year long is if he can be, the new Archie Griffin and be the first back-to-back Heisman winner since that time period. But, yeah, I mean, the other guys on this list, they all make sense. There's tons of other names you can throw on here if you wanted to. Lots of other quarterbacks you could throw on here if you wanted to.
Well, we're not done with the list. But
okay.
These are the first 5 names.
All right. Yeah. Well, then let's keep going then.
All right. The next page, that includes, again, a bunch of quarterbacks. Bo Nix, Quinn Ewers, Hartman at Notre Dame, McCarthy at Michigan, and Klubnik, who is the quarterback, the Texas kid, who is at Clemson. There's another list after this. Let's go ahead and do that, Garrett. The list that includes actually a non-quarterback with Marvin Harrison Jr. there, Carson Beck of Georgia, who's a new name once they have made up their mind and who can lead them to the promised land. And then you have Ohio State, that's McCord, another young, inexperienced quarterback, and then Joe Milton at Tennessee.
Yeah, I like J.J. McCarthy a lot for being a Heisman finalist this year. I'm kind of surprised. If you want my, the darkest horse of all darkest horses in this, I'm going to throw in and it doesn't happen because he's a tight end, but I'm going to throw out Brock Bowers just because he's so unique, and Georgia's going to have a new quarterback, so I think the Carson Beck, who's on this list, is going to lean very heavily on Brock Bowers early on. But, yeah, I think, this is the list, and everything's going to depend, and, I think for the guys not named Caleb Williams and Drake Maye, Jordan Travis to win it, Florida State's going to have to win the ACC. For Jaden Daniels to win it, he might have a little bit because he's in the SEC, more of a softer spot to land. But I think LSU is going to have to beat, they're going to have to beat Alabama again. If they don't, then Jaden Daniels is probably not going to win it because that's just kind of how people are graded on that. Who else was in the number one? Was Michael Penix.
Yep.
Yeah, they're going to have to do again. Penix and Bo Nix are going to have to make real waves in the pack this year.
Minimum of getting to the playoff, you think, for them, or do they just have to make sure they're
Big stats in contention for the conference until the very last week.
Craig?
Yeah, I think again, lots of quarterbacks. Good to see Marvin Harrison Jr. on the list. No running backs. That's kind of surprising to not see a Blake Corum on there.
Actually, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Okay, I'm holding.
Wasn't there one more? You were speaking of that, Craig, because you're right. There was one more list that I don't know if it. Yeah, there you go. The quarterback, Drew Allar, is that right? At Penn State, and then Blake Corum, Michigan. Dylan Gabriel, Oklahoma. That was the last. So Corum is there, but very near the end.
So we're done for sure. Okay, all right. Well,
yes,
then there's Blake Corum, and I was going to mention Dylan Gabriel. I was surprised to not see his name on there either. So yeah, I think that checks all the boxes I was wondering about. Now that we've seen the full list, and it makes sense to have all those guys. I don't see any. If I hadn't seen Corum, if I hadn't seen Gabriel, if I hadn't seen Marvin Harrison Jr., then I would have had some questions. But I think that checks most of the boxes you see on a preseason Heisman list. A bunch of the top quarterbacks from the top teams, and then a sprinkling of other guys. And I don't think that outside of maybe if you want to throw a Quinshon Judkins in there, but I know that the odds of him winning it are just super long. Randomly a running back from Ole Miss jump and leapfrogging all these guys would take a lot, not only from him, but from his team. But I just think in terms of like great players, he'd be a guy you look at amongst, plenty of others that, will probably emerge at various points this season. There will be some new names we talk about for sure. So, excited to see this initial batch. Not that there's any huge surprises, and look forward to seeing if, Caleb Williams can pull off the Archie Griffin, or, whoever ruins his chances, much like others ruin the chances of a Johnny Manziel who attempted to do the same thing.
There's a reason, though, even though some have had a chance to repeat, and Paul, you mentioned some because they just weren't quite as good, or maybe somebody else jumped up. It's hard to keep the standard. And if Caleb Williams has a really good year, but doesn't quite have the dynamic year where USC, what they did, you wonder if he's graded on a different level. Because you would think it would give him the benefit of the doubt being the returning Heisman winner, but sometimes that means people even grade him on a harder scale.
So I think if you look at the three guys I threw out, Tebow, Manziel, and Jameis Winston, Tebow's team got all the way and they lost to Alabama in the conference title game. It's just there were so many, that was a year around Tim Tebow where there were just a lot of really good candidates, and he'd already won it. Plus, that team wasn't as maybe dynamic. Florida wasn't as exciting that year, even though they were really good. They weren't, of the Tebow teams, they were kind of the one that was a little bit mundane. If you can say that, because all those teams were really good. With Johnny Manziel, you saw it. He got very complacent. Everybody around him got a little complacent and entitled. There was a lot going on. He was partying Paul Hornung would even thought bro, you got to slow down how much he was partying. And with Jameis Winston and FSU, that team somehow managed to roll all the way through the regular season and the conference title game undefeated, but falling behind and coming back in every single game because they were super entitled and they knew they were really talented, and they didn't have to kind of put a effort until the fourth quarter. And then you saw what happened in the Oregon game, which was an unmitigated disaster in the Rose Bowl. So you kind of have the attitude, it's not just the Heisman winner, it's everybody who's in their orbit that somehow sometimes gets some a little bit of entitlement themselves because we've got the Heisman Trophy winner. He's right here. Look at this. We got this guy. And then sometimes it's you won it because all of you were really good and he was the best of all of you.
All right, Craig, wrap this up, and then Paul, we'll get Chris Pesman on from the University of Houston. If he loses a game early they're not supposed to lose, then does he have to be twice as good the rest of the year?
Who, Caleb Williams?
Yeah.
I think that depends on who they lose to. How'd they lose? What did he do in the game? Was he the reason they lost, or did he have 5 touchdowns and 500 yards and 100 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown, and they lost in triple overtime? I think the circumstances matter. So that's a question that needs far more details. But yeah, if you stumble early, it's a winner's award. You don't give it to guys who have lost 5 games. If USC were to lose 5 games anyway in Caleb Williams' final year, that'd be abject disaster.
Right.
So that's not that realistic. But No, I think you stumble early. That doesn't rule anything out. It's just a matter of what does that stumble look like. And, if anything, I guess it just means you can't really afford a second one. But no, it wouldn't by any means rule him out unless it was just a terrible performance, the likes of which we've never really seen from him before.
We are now joined by the University of Houston